Wait a second. This random stranger on the internet raises her kid differently than I do. Essential oils? Really? She chooses that? Oh, oh, and she's a Christian. She believes differently than I do, and she uses essential oils. I'm starting a Reddit thread.
And we're back, finally, with another Gab with Abigail. If you aren't back and this is your first time on my channel, hi, welcome to Gabs with Abigail, where we talk about the Bates and Duggars and other D-list fundies. Today, we're talking about a D-list fundie, Duggar-adjacent Kristen Nicole Young, a kind of crunchy momfluencer with a penchant for headbands and goofy faces. Now, I hadn't been on Kristen's page in 2 years, maybe that's dramatic, like a year, because, D-list fundie. But Joy Duggar had mentioned her in a story for people to follow for some contest. And I realized I couldn't find her page. And I was like, oh wow, she must have blocked me. So I feel like talking about her content today. Now, I'm not going to necessarily say nice things about Kristen in the same way that I did for the Solely version of this video. And that's because I kind of feel like Solely's under 25. And not that I think that she might change, but Solely sometimes feels like that annoying gay cousin who everybody knows is gay and we don't care is gay, but they feel like they need to keep bringing it up. But I do want to say I understand and appreciate that Kristen is a living and breathing human being with feelings. And I do think that she's probably a lovely person. And this is in no way on her entire experience and existence, but this is commentary and criticism. So let's get into the video. Kristen Nicole Young was born in Arkansas on June 6, 1992. She's the eldest of 3 siblings, and it seems like she grew up pretty religious, the evangelical kind, but not fundy. After graduating high school, Kristen attended Washita Baptist University in Arkansas, where the intercultural requirement for her degree was taking 2 semesters of a foreign language class. Somebody DM Jen and ask her if there is a deep dive into Washita Baptist University. I mean, I could ask, but it's going to seem like I'm being lazy. Kristen graduated from OBU in 2014 with a degree in what else but mass communications. That same year, she married her college sweetheart, Justin Lee Young, and straight out of college, they both got jobs at Tacos for Life, a taco chain that donates a portion of each purchase to feeding children around the globe through their partnership with Christian nonprofit Feeding My Starving Children. Through this job and organization, Kristen was able to make several international trips and has the obligatory white missionary photos on her Instagram. I don't have the time to go into why Christian missionary trips are kind of problematic, so I'll leave a link to the Illuminati's video on the topic. But to put it succinctly, it will never make sense asking for money to fund a trip so you can have an experience doing charity. Like, why wouldn't you just give that money to the charity? There's just something self-righteously indulgent about that kind of thing, but I digress. In 2015, Kristen and her husband opened up a franchise of Tacos for Life in Fayetteville, Arkansas. And it's in 2015 that Kristen posts pictures of her and Jessa Duggar for the first time, at the Duggar compound, no less. The Counting On episode where Sierra and Joy throw a baby shower.
How come you guys always include men and children at baby showers?
I can't handle awkward baby showers. I just can't do it. It is so much more fun, and there is less stress. It's just a big party. It's not a stressful where everybody sits in a circle and stares at each other. That's why.
Is for Kristen.
In a nutshell, this evening we'll be picking up Kristen. We will be touring a local boutique kitchenware supply store.
So how cute is this place?
So cute, right? I've been here before.
Let's go get Betty!
And Tacos for Life is also featured on Counting On as the place where Jessa and Ben have their first post-baby date.
Yeah, now that the baby's born, we're going to have to make more of a conscious effort to say, hey, let's go out on a date together. We've got some friends that actually are running this place, Tacos for Life, provide meals for children in Central America. So each meal that they sell, a lot of that money goes to feeding hungry kids.
And also where they surprise Ginger with Jeremy like flying in from out of town from Texas. After having their first baby in 2016, Kristen became a full-time stay-at-home mom, having 3 more children between 2016 and 2022. In late 2017, while Kristen was in her first trimester with their second child, Justin confessed that he had lost his job at Tacos for Life due to alcohol-related issues, admitting that he had also been unfaithful in their marriage. Obviously, as we can see from their Instagram account, they're still together, which I don't think there's anything wrong with that. It doesn't sound like, from the way they talk about it, that he was like a violent drunk, and like it's not really a Josh and Anna type situation. Also, Intervention is like one of my favorite shows, especially the alcoholism episodes. So I'm like always going to root for somebody to get better. And I love that he has a healthy support system around him to get better. And he's currently 4 years sober, which is awesome. And like my sincerest wishes to him on this, the rest of his lifelong journey with sobriety. In fact, listening to his story, I was like, maybe I'll go on a 90-day cleanse. Like maybe I need to cut back. Anyways, it's in late 2018 and into 2019 that Kristen really starts becoming a Christian momfluencer. Prior to this, her Instagram had really just kind of been a snapshot of her life. And of course, with like some postings that were spiritual. There was her brief foray into MLMs, but again, she had not gone full-blown influencer during that time. But the Young Living oils probably should have been the red flag that that's where this was headed. With 2020 and the pandemic and Instagram's aggressive reels push, we really got some of the best of Kristen Nicole Young's content. A true insight into the beliefs displayed through her look at how quirky I am as personality. Her adjectives are fiery and passionate. So let's look at some of the gems from her page, i.e., her terrible takes. I don't know why, but COVID really brought out the bat crazy from Kristen. Maybe it was from always being crunchy adjacent. Maybe it was the stress and anxiety of being a stay-at-home mother with a recovering alcoholic husband and you can't leave the house. I don't know. I'm not a doctor. What I do know is that we got this series of mental breakdowns that my initial reaction to got me blocked for. March 14th, 2021, Kristen had this to say about masks because a hit dog needed to holler as they do. And it's like, girl, I'm sorry that it hurt your feelings having people attack your entire character for a moment in your life where you decided to be selfish. Your action was selfish and self-entitled, despite that not necessarily being your natural and entire personhood. You actively made a choice to see wearing a mask during a global pandemic from a novel being super key, virus, as an infringement of your personal liberty, rather than as a way to protect and serve your community, and by extension, your country. The most loving thing you could have done for the workers who were on the front line for the virus and for the workers who had lost their jobs due to shutdowns was wear a mask. Instead, they got playful videos of you from the comfort of your home, telling them you're entitled to endangering their lives due to your privileged idea of what tyranny is. These videos seem like the petulant tantrum of a conventionally attractive white woman who has lived her entire life in the good old USA social privilege and has just heard no for the first time. Do you have any idea how, as a Black woman, it sounds to hear Kristen say wearing a mask is tyranny? This is such a great example of white evangelicals and how they believe so deeply in their own personal goodness that they're above reproach from people who do not share their worldview. The I can't be racist because I'm nice to everybody shtick, but now it's being applied to wearing a mask. And I'm just so tired.
I'm so tired, child. I'm so tired. I'm really tired.
The very next day, continuing this terrible take on masks, Kristen then posts a video accusing people who were saying that not wearing a mask wasn't Christ-like were spreading a false gospel.
All right, believers, let's have a little heart-to-heart. Just because I can't stop thinking about this, the Holy Spirit has been stirring. I mean, this is something that He's been stirring in me for a long time. And obviously, I was off social media for a while. And anyway, it's something that just has to be said. And so, let's chat about it. If you are teaching that wearing a mask is synonymous to being a Christian, you are teaching a false gospel. If you are teaching that you cannot be loving, or it's not Christ-like, or it's not like Jesus to not wear a mask, you are teaching and believing a false gospel. In Galatians 1, verse 6, he writes, I'm astonished that you are so quickly deserting him who called you in the grace of Christ and are turning to a different gospel. Not that there is another one, but there are some who trouble you and want to distort the gospel of Christ. But even if we or an angel from heaven should preach to you a gospel contrary to the one we preach to you, let him be accursed. As we have said before, so now I say again, if anyone is preaching to you a gospel contrary to the one you received, let him be accursed. For am I now seeking the approval of man or of God? Or am I trying to please man? If I were still trying to please man, I would not be a servant of Christ. So, I'm not saying there's like a whole, we're preaching some mask, it's like that's what saves you. But there, in the circle of the church, there is a lot of talk that is being infiltrated that if you don't wear a mask, that you are unloving, that you are not being Christ-like, that you can't be a Christian, that you don't care for other people, and that has to stop because it is a false gospel. And it brought to mind when I was listening to that this morning, that, okay, in the Old Testament, external factors were part of being in right relationship with God. So circumcision, that was an external factor that was considered, to put someone in right relationship with God, obviously for the males. But when Christ came, he came to the circumcised and the uncircumcised, and it was no longer about the external, so they didn't have to be circumcised anymore to be in right relationship with God. The gospel is that we are dead, and we are suck, and we live in sin, and Jesus came to rescue us, and for us to live in his grace, not grace by means of just doing whatever the heck we want, but we get to live in the grace, and that is the gospel. And when we live in the gospel, when we walk with Christ, when we are in relationship with him, that is the gospel. That is what makes us a believer. That is what makes us Christ-like, when he sanctifies us and we walk as Jesus did. And whenever we tie something like wearing a mask or not wearing a mask, or vaccinating or not vaccinated, or or eating certain food, honestly anything, when we are drinking alcohol, that's a big one too. If we tie any of those to the gospel and it being a determining factor of being in right relationship with God, it is a false gospel.
Oh, we're the heretics. Got you. Like, I can understand wanting to be cautious about the vaccine, honestly, and totally can understand that fear about that. Fine. But the sanctimonious mask stuff is ridiculous. Even if you have something like a really bad cold, it's still really beneficial and courteous and thoughtful to your community to wear a mask and prevent it from being spread to other people. If your kid is sick and you've been around your kid, and even if you don't have any symptoms, wouldn't it be beneficial to still wear a mask in public? I just think it's so funny. Like, she's acting like she's mad about not getting the choice to wear a mask. Like, I was going to do it until you told me I have to. Like, baby, you were not going to do it, and that's why they had to make up the rule to force you to do it. Like, this was the case for millions of America, just because America doesn't really think of itself in like collective community minded. Kristen probably sees herself as somebody who serves her community, but there's a difference between serving your community and actually being like collective community minded. And look, fine. She was upset about being called a bad Christian, and I agree. We shouldn't do that. I mean, she does it all the time with progressive Christians, but she's a better person than us, so when she does it, it's okay. But, okay, so no calling Kristen a bad Christian. We'll just say ultimately, across cultures, you were not a great human being. Like, I'm just so tired of evangelicals thinking that they live separate Christian lives when in reality, you are a global citizen and we have basic responsibilities to each other. For example, Western industrialization has had a severe impact on the environmental dangers the global South experiences. If in the future, legally it is required for Kristen to drive less to try and combat this, that it's not tyranny, that is not false gospel, and she should not get to ignore this due to her religion and the idea of what her freedom is. I love this one. No research, just vibes. There are so many reasons that this is a terrible take. The first being 10 million abortions where? In the world? The US? Down the street? Do you know the Muffin Man? Like, not only that, but the website where she got these statistics from isn't clear if these are just induced abortions or if this also includes involuntary abortions, also known as miscarriages. Not only this, but also she didn't include a statistic about how many COVID deaths had occurred around the world or in the US at that point. I guess it's false gospel to say that as a Christian, she should care just as much about the lives that were lost to COVID as those that were lost to abortion. And that's the other reason why this is a terrible take, in my opinion, just how callously flippant it is about the people who had died from COVID. Like, it's never going to not be weird to me comparing aborted fetuses to the deaths of people who had entire livelihoods, memories, deep relationships with people, and the grief that gets left behind in their wake. Kristen has never experienced the sudden loss of a spouse, a parent, a sibling, or a child that she loved earthside, having to pack up their clothes and bedrooms, having to all of a sudden sleep alone without them. Like, not being able to hear their laugh anymore, not being able to hear their voice anymore, the Christmases and Thanksgivings and Easters that all of a sudden you don't get to spend with them anymore, and having every holiday remind you of their absence. The amount of people at the beginning of COVID who couldn't even attend funerals to bury their dead loved ones. And then that's not to mention the people who might have recovered but have developed long COVID. Being willing to ignore these truths is just proof, it's just a poor reflection of your character. Be pro-life all you want, but stick to the Bible about the truths as to why it's a big deal, Miss Mamas.
I want to talk about, as believers, talking about what's going on in the world. And there's a lot of really hard things to face, and a lot of really hard things to talk about, and a lot of really unpopular things to talk about. But if we, as believers, listen, the conversation has already been started, right? Like, the world is going to continue to have the conversation regardless if Christians are in it or not. The conversation has been started about sex, about drugs, about alcohol, about entertainment, about politics, about health, about food, every single arena. The world has already started the conversation. The conversation is ongoing. So we can't get away from the conversation. So if we as believers who hold the truth of the gospel, we know that Jesus says, I am the way, the truth, the life. So if we as believers hold the truth and we refuse to get into these conversations, then who is going to bring the truth? If the truth holders are not sharing the truth in conversations that the world is talking about, then where is the truth going to come from? And so then you have this whole thing of like, well, my truth and your truth and this truth and that truth. And then truth becomes relative, which we've seen now. And I really believe, and there are different factors, but I really believe that because we have not, and listen, I don't want to bash the church because I have a post coming about that too, about everybody needs to stop bashing the church. But one of those things is I think that we need to do a better job. I think we can challenge ourselves and encourage ourselves in speaking up about politics, about the topics that nobody really wants to dabble in because, like, numbers at the church would go down or follower count would go down or maybe your friends would be kind of ostracized or, like, weirded out by you. But I really believe that progressive Christianity, as we see it now, and this younger generation coming up has adopted these ideologies that the culture is spewing because we in the church are just sitting back and saying, I'm not really political, or I don't really want to get into that subject, or I don't really know a whole lot about that, or I don't really, want to avoid that conversation.
We have never, ever, 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 ever stopped hearing opinions of Christians. Christianity is so deeply embedded in our society. People are still homophobic, transphobic. People still don't like fat people. Schools still don't teach comprehensive sex ed. Women are still being slut-shamed. Like 90% of the members of our federal government identify as Christian, etc. But if your head has been up your own ass for a very long time, it can be hard to smell your own shit, as is life living in a perpetual state of white Christian persecution complex. Millennials and Gen Z have grown up with Kristen's evangelicalism, and I think it's so weird that she thinks they aren't just choosing to reject her version of Christianity. She's used this language, shepherding, like they have not been properly indoctrinated by their parents and church peers. People are allowed to reject your version of your religion and its teachings, full stop. The same way that you, Kristen, reject quote unquote progressive Christianity, people are allowed to reject conservative evangelicalism. And you need to accept that you aren't God to pass condemnation, like regarding what a real and true believer is. I understand that for Kristen as a evangelical, she feels a certain amount of responsibility to bring people to Christ and to build a society that reflects her particular faith and that faith's worldview. But the reality of life is that people are allowed to reject your religion and its teachings, and they shouldn't have to suffer for that. And yes, Kristen, you're causing people to suffer simply because they don't agree with your religion.
As the church, and I'm speaking to myself as well, is we no longer have the liberty to bury our head in the sand. And I get this because I would rather do that sometimes too, because it's a lot easier. It gets really overwhelming trying to learn about what all is going on in the world, what's going on in politics, what's going on in health, what's going on in entertainment, what's going on in culture. I mean, it gets really overwhelming, and it's easier to just step back and say, I'm just going to love people like Jesus did, which is what we should be doing anyways. But to love people is not just to, love is not fluffy, okay? Like, love, when Jesus loved us, he literally was beaten and murdered, and that kind of love is not fluffy, right? Like love is not fluffy. Love is me telling my kids, you can't run into the street because you will get hurt. It's setting boundaries. Love is, it's like a deep care for somebody, not to just look at them and say, oh, I love you, so I accept your lifestyle. It's, no, I love you, and I see you're heading towards a cliff, and I'm going to tell you that you should not go towards that cliff because you could die, and I don't want you to die because I love you. And so when we love other people, when we genuinely love, when we have this love that Jesus had for other people, we should want to share the truth, to share the gospel, to shepherd others, to say, hey, this is the way you should walk in. This is what Scripture says. This is what the Bible says about this instance, about this topic. And so burying our head in the sand is the opposite of love. Because when we bury our head in the sand, we're saying, I would rather enjoy my own comfort than put myself out there to help somebody or help protect somebody. And like I said, this is to me too as well, because it's easier, it's more comfortable, it's less emotionally draining. I feel like this past year, I have been so emotionally, mentally drained.
Love is me telling my kids that they can't run into the street because they'll get hurt. We are not your children. We are not your responsibility. Love does, in fact, require you to ask people how they need to be loved. And it's no way Kristen and her husband have not communicated their emotional and relationship needs to each other. Their relationship wouldn't work if they didn't find ways to compromise on those things. I'm sure there have been moments when doing that was difficult and uncomfortable, but they do it out of a desire to make their relationship work and out of love. Kristen doesn't use this example when it comes to describing a loving relationship with strangers because white evangelicalism is used to infantilizing those they consider not to be saved. In her marriage, when dealing with her husband's alcoholism, Kristen had this to say.
And so I was crying out to God one day, and God just clearly spoke, let go of control, let go of the anger, of the bitterness. And that's what I did. I tried to control because I didn't want to get hurt, and I was angry.
And I wish she would connect the dots and apply this logic to others who don't believe as she does. That isn't burying your head in the sand. Lastly, while being a Christian may require that you love everyone, Kristen is still a member of a society composed of people who are not defined by Christianity. They do not require Kristen's love, they require Kristen's respect. So, at the very least, Kristen should be transparent and honest that she does not respect the livelihoods of people who are not Christian like she is. And this brings us to our next terrible take. I don't have one particular clip or post for this because her overall take is just so bad. So I will just post some things to the side of me and you can pause to read. At the heart and center of my issue with Kristen and people like her is their lack of humility and grace for other people's beliefs. I understand the comfort and the peace religion provides by giving definitive answers to unknowns. How can you stand firm in your faith if you respect the possibility that other interpretations are right? Which is how it appears evangelicals view validating other interpretations of the Bible. Dismissing progressive Christianity as just based in feelings is really so disrespectful and, simply put, isn't true. It's also so hypocritical because, to a certain extent, religion is a deeply emotional experience. The amount of time that Kristen has stated the Holy Ghost was speaking to me, or this anecdote from summer camp that she posted about not hearing God the entire time that she was there, and then as she was leaving, all of a sudden she heard his voice. Like, be for real. What do you think that those moments are, if not your feelings? And even if in these moments, Kristen feels justified because they led her back to the Bible truths, I want to once again reiterate that these are the truths as Kristen was taught to read and interpret the Bible. Kristen acts like there's only one way ever that the Bible has been interpreted, and it's now being warped and manipulated by this new evil left. And it's like, that's just such a weird thing to believe, especially in America, home to the Puritans, Mormons, Seventh-day Adventists, Jehovah's Witness, the Baptists, the Methodists, the Quakers, the Shakers, the Catholics, the First and Second Great Awakening, etc. I mean, just the existence of the Black American Church points to how differently the Bible can be interpreted. And I get that it's like, yes, but those denominations are still homophobic, and so we're pretty much the same. Like, my point is that these culture wars aren't new. Straight White American Jesus has a great series explaining the rise and fall and rise again of the Christian left, juxtaposed to the Christian right, and I would encourage you to listen to it. But as it relates to this video, an evangelical like Kristen believes every word in the Bible literally. And we know this to be the case for her based on how she uses the language like of the word truths. This is not the case for progressive Christians. And so in this vein, Kristen will never be able to accept or legitimize progressive Christianity. Kristen self-described herself as an authentic Christian. She's very committed to misunderstanding what progressive Christianity is and defining it based on her religion and cultural worldview. That is the easier and more comfortable thing to do. Kristen talks about in the burying in your head in the sand video, uncomfortable confrontations with people.
Burying our head in the sand is the opposite of love. Because when we bury our head in the sand, we're saying, I would rather enjoy my own comfort than put myself out there to help somebody or help protect somebody. And like I said, this is to me too, as well. Because it's easier, it's more comfortable, it's less emotionally draining. I feel like this past year, I have been so emotionally, mentally drained.
But it's discomfort from believing she knows better than those people. It's not discomfort from learning different things and from what she already thinks that she knows. Dan and Brad from Straight White American Jesus talk about how evangelicals believe in the rapture and the imminent coming of Jesus. From this perspective, you can understand then why evangelicals like Kristen are so obsessed with getting people to adopt their idea of Christianity, either by choice or by force. Kristen will never understand that I am not afraid of her heaven and her hell. If Kristen heard this, she would probably say, well, heaven and hell come from the Bible, not from me. So, like, how could they belong to her? And from my perspective, no mere mortal is going to put the fear of the afterlife into me. So, you can keep your heaven, you can keep your hell. Only God is going to be able to do that. We're all sinners. There's just something repugnantly self-righteous telling believers what God is going to weigh as worse. Like, we know these things are sins. Move on. Another key element of progressive Christianity, Dan and Brad explain, is the emphasis on the social gospel and the idea that our institutions can be sinful and that as Christians we have a responsibility to address that. These aren't new contemporaneous ideas or theologies, like Kristen keeps suggesting in her videos and posts. But having grown up in a Christian tradition that emphasizes individual salvation, of course, Kristen doesn't see this as scripturally sound, which, okay, fine. Go live in your truth. Which brings me to what I want to discuss last in this bad take on progressive Christianity.
So then you have this whole thing of like, well, my truth and your truth and this truth and that truth, and then truth becomes relative, which we've seen now.
Rhetoric that's coming out of Kristen's camp. Again, it feels like a pointed commitment to misunderstanding and hyperbole. Of course, people have different truths. People have different lives and experiences. How I experienced high school and how the girl sitting next to me experienced high school, despite being all in the same classes for the 4 years, are going to be two completely different things. And that doesn't somehow make our personal truths less truthful. Having recently watched Ghislaine Maxwell's documentary on Netflix, the victims of that crime also used the language of getting to tell their truth, because that's what it is their story in which that they were victimized. And there's just something like just pernicious about this contempt with which right-leaning people are using the phrase of your truth. So in short, Kristen, please stop defining progressive Christianity as something that it isn't. It's okay to not like it, baby, but like, please don't lie. Like that's it.
This is a huge day in history, and whether you are celebrating or you're very upset, I think this is something that we all need to hear. We need to remember that we go to war in the marketplace of ideas, as Vodi Bakum says. We don't go to war with the person. So you can attack the ideas and you can debate the ideas without being hateful and rude to the person and attacking that character. So go to war in the marketplace of ideas, but not against the people.
So this video was posted in response to Roe v. Wade being overturned. I agree that I shouldn't say Kristen has the fuggliest style I've ever seen just because I disagree with her on some things. But I'm not going to pretend that her ideas are magically separate from her character and personhood. Her ideas are not innocuous statements that float around a mythological marketplace. They have actual impacts on actual people's lives. And I'm so sick of white conservatives, and yes, I know Vodi Bakum is Black, thinking that because they didn't pick up a gun, that their beliefs and fear-mongering don't empower people to violence. And in these instances aren't far and few enough between to ignore. 5 people are dead in Colorado because of the hateful rhetoric that people like Kristen like, memify, and engage with in the name of a supposed love of Christ. Kristen is the moderate that the MLK they didn't teach her about hates. The white person who was like, well, I wasn't protesting outside of the Little Rock Nines high school. I just moved my kids to a private school to keep them from mixed race classrooms.
This is your reminder that you don't need permission from any government, any institution, any doctor, any school, anyone else on how to raise your kid. You are the parent. You are the gatekeeper. You are the one who determines what is best for your family and raises your children. You do not need permission from anyone else. You are the one who raises your kids. You raise your kids in the way of the Lord, and you trust Him, and you do not need permission from anyone else. Don't buy into the lie of the government.
Kristen and conservative evangelicals like her don't see the parallels in their behaviors because they believe so deeply in their personal goodness, compassion, kindness, and correct understanding of the gospel of Jesus. And for them, that is enough. But we see these parallels. And while history doesn't necessarily repeat, it certainly does rhyme. There is no introspective reflection regarding how they continue to prop up the same institutions that have historically negatively impacted the most marginalized groups in our society. Their belief in the theology that God doesn't promise an easy life allows white conservative evangelicals who are sitting in the upper echelons of society's privilege to feel like they don't owe marginalized groups to listen to their legitimate issues and propose solutions, especially if it causes them discomfort or disagreement. For white conservative evangelicals like Kristen, yes, there is racism, but I'm nice to everyone. Yes, there are poor people, but I worked hard and participate in food drives. Yes, there is underfunded public schools, but that's why I homeschool.
Ask God to expose. The more we talk about these things, the more that we add truth to these conversations, the more that the enemy's schemes are uncovered. The more that darkness is uncovered, the more that deceit is uncovered. The more that we talk about these things and add truth to the conversation, the more that we can start to see, okay, where is the enemy really at work? Because he's a sneaky little guy and he's deceptive and he will come in any way he can, not with the, we've talked about this before, not with like the little, horns saying like, I'm gonna kill you all. He comes in and he is like super subtle about it. And so when we start to talk about these really hard things in culture, and we start to break down these cultural ideologies like critical race theory and modern day feminism when it tears down men, when we start to break down those things and say this is not biblical, and then we start saying here is what biblical womanhood looks like, here's how you can be proud of the woman that God created you to be while not tearing down men, here's how you can love your neighbors and your friends of different skin colors while not being sorry for being your own skin color. There are ways that we can add value to the conversation, but we have to know the truth ourselves. And that means that we have to spend time in the Word. We have to spend time in prayer with the Holy Spirit.
You may not negatively talk about them as people or Christians because of their thoughts and beliefs. Side note, her understanding and definition of critical race theory is influenced by her worldview. Feeling shame or guilt about parts of history you don't know is your own emotional business. It happened, and you need to understand the impacts of what happened. But I guess it's okay to bury your head in the sand about that. Don't worry about it. It's just a bit ridiculous to act as though your thoughts and beliefs are not reflections of your character, or that they are being misunderstood due to your accurate interpretation of the Bible. It's weird that accurate interpretation means that you are Christ-like the mostest, which means you're a good person, and that this is all just a disagreement of stagnant ideas. I almost want to say, like, get over yourself just a little bit. Like, wouldn't it be awesome to attend another church that maybe marries gay couples and listen to them say something or preach a sermon on where you guys meet in the middle of like a similar biblical interpretation, instead of this whole, you're a bad Christian, we're all bad Christian, that we just keep seeming to sling back and forth. Anyways, that's it for this video. I'm super tired. I don't know why I filmed this so late at night, so that's where my steam is gone. Thank you guys for watching. I promise to do at least 2 more videos this month.
It's like you niggas gotta stop